Having dreams of hitting the lottery or inventing the next $1,000,000 idea? On this edition of Money in Your Pocket, we're talking about sudden wealth and what you need to know. Our guest is David McGrady from EIU School of Business. We'll be discussing what you should do if you come into a windfall, such as what steps you should take and what pitfalls to avoid. That's all coming up on this week's edition of Money in Your Pocket, so stay right here.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One, proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.
Welcome back to this edition of Money in Your Pocket. I'm Lori Banks, and today we're talking about sudden wealth with David McGrady from EIU School of Business. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Enjoy it, Lori. Look forward to it.
So let's talk about sudden wealth and windfalls. It doesn't happen to everybody, but surprisingly, it can happen in different ways to people. It's not just about winning the lottery.
Right. There's a lot of forms it could take. For example, it could be an inheritance, could be a situation where you're changing jobs and all of a sudden you've got a check from your 401k plan. So it can be really any situation where you come into money that can create a life-changing situation. So it's not just the one in a million type situation.
Okay. Talk to me about this thing that you came up with in your research called sudden wealth syndrome.
What's the idea of learning to handle the emotions that accompany the money? A lot of us are going to experience in a lifetime a gradual increase in wealth where we save every month for retirement and we open the statements every quarter, and over a long period of time we accumulate a fairly substantial amount of wealth versus a situation here where it might be anticipated as an inheritance, but it could be completely unanticipated where we're faced with dealing with a large sum of money, and there's a lot of emotional issues that accompany that. One thing that people talk about is the loss of identity. All of a sudden, am I somebody different than I was before, or am I going to assume a new lifestyle? Some of us might be old enough to remember the Beverly Hillbillies, for example,
Yes.
and what they went through in trying to figure out, am I still Jed, or am I somebody different at that point? And then we have to deal with other emotional issues, like obviously one of the things you worry about is, now because I have all this wealth, do people view me differently, and do people still like me because they're me, because I'm me, or do they like me because I do have all this wealth? So a lot of things to sort out, and it certainly can cause conflict in family situations. And so it's something where the experts in this area basically talk about it's very important if you do come, especially with unanticipated sudden wealth, that you call a time out and not do anything hastily until you kind of get your feet on the ground and get yourself surrounded by advisors that can help you deal with this wealth.
I imagine in some cases there could be some guilt associated with getting this money. Maybe if it's an inheritance, someone had to pass away in your life for you to get that money.
Right, yes, and certainly that creates issues in terms of maybe how we invest the money, because we feel like we have an obligation to be a good steward of those funds. We want to see those funds continue to grow, perhaps maybe even pass it on to the next generation to kind of honor the legacy of that gift. So yeah, it certainly creates a little bit of pressure in that type of situation.
In some ways, money can alleviate some problems, but it can create a whole other set of, maybe not, problems in some cases, but other issues that you didn't have to deal with before.
Right, and I think a lot of people view it as where it almost adds fuel to the fire, where if you were maybe struggling with some issues before and now you have what you view as maybe unlimited funds, that all of a sudden those issues can become magnified. So again, it's certainly something where we have to be cautious, take some time out, and maybe surround ourselves with the right people to help us deal with this. Everything from a financial advisor, but maybe somebody that can help us deal with the emotional side of the issue too.
Yeah. Let's talk about this idea of a gradual increase in wealth versus that sudden increase, because both of them have different implications and things to consider.
Right. One of the things we have to think about with the sudden increase in wealth is what is the source of that sudden increase in wealth. It could be something like, for example, somebody that decided to become a surgeon, so not only did they go through all their training, probably did a residency of some type, and have lived a very modest means for a long period of time, but then all of a sudden now they have a ton of money in front of them, and so we've got to essentially perhaps look at maybe assuming a new identity in terms of the lifestyle that we're going to have, and and that's a difficult thing to do. The gradual situation, you go to work at a business and you get a raise every year, and so therefore, maybe your income goes up 5 or 10% a year. That's a lot easier adjustment to make in lifestyle than going from essentially making nothing to making 6 or 7 figures every year.
Talk about this idea. I know every situation is going to be different with how much money you're getting, but you made a very good point about what should you spend the money on. There are some other implications to think about if you spend it on, say, a big house.
Right. Yes. Then let's first assume that you surround yourself with advisors and you get yourself in a comfortable financial situation where you have an emergency fund and your retirement's adequately funded, and kids' college, if you desire to pay for a portion or all of that, is adequately funded. And if you have any charitable intentions, those are taken care of. So beyond that, if we're looking at spending the funds, one of the things we have to think about is this something that's going to create an ongoing liability where we're going to have to pay for this not once, but every year? For example, your example of buying a new house, where that's going to be accompanied with obviously higher costs in terms of utilities. Every year we're going to be looking at higher property taxes, insurance expense, all those types of things. Versus if we maybe took the money and spent it on a cruise for a round-the-world cruise for our family, which obviously can be a substantial amount of money too, but it doesn't have the ongoing obligations. And so that's important to sort through those issues. I mean, do I have, is the sudden wealth coming all in a lump sum, which is a completely different animal versus if it's coming in an annuity type form, where I know I'm going to have these dollars every year where I can handle these annual obligations that I'm creating for myself.
All right, let's talk about lump sums versus annuities. You hear that a lot in lotteries. When my husband passed away, I had the choice with his large retirement to take a big lump sum or take it over the course. And luckily, I had some good advice as to what to do with that. But it's a decision. So how do you know which avenue to go?
Well, I think it's going to be different for everyone. And again, you need to work with an advisor to think through the thought process. But one of the things you certainly want to think about is your risk tolerance and how you view that money. If it's something where you're going to be super conservative and you're very, very worried about, how are these funds going to perform in the marketplace, then that probably would gravitate a little bit more towards going with the annuity. On the other hand, if I've managed money before, or I have an advisor that I'm very comfortable with how he or she manages my money, then I might lean more towards the lump sum environment. We also have to think about, quite frankly, how disciplined you are with money. If you're the kind of person that you can't resist the sale at Rural King, maybe you go with the annuity just so that you can't spend more than this X dollars that you've got coming in every year, versus if you're disciplined and you don't worry about blowing through the funds, then that might lean you towards the lump sum alternative.
And we're going to get into tax implications in a little bit, but first I want to talk about some steps to take. So you get said lump of money, in whatever form. it should take. What's the first thing that you should do?
I think the first thing that I would do if that happened to me is, again, call time out and think about some long-term decisions that I have to make. I would surround myself with a good attorney, financial advisor, financial planner. Even insurance can be an issue, because all of a sudden, if I'm perceived as being wealthy, I might have more liability risks than I did before. So after I've got this team together, then I would think about how these funds are going to be managed. And particularly if I'm in a situation where, and then you got to deal with, are you going to let people know what has happened here?
Yes.
And that's certainly, an interesting issue when you see, the lottery type people. I mean, obviously professional athletes can't hide the fact that they're probably pretty well paid. But if I, as I do deal with that situation, I probably would like to use my advisors to maybe build a fence between me and maybe some other people that, all of a sudden, if your kid found out you just inherited $2 million and they're thinking, well, like, why can't I buy a new Jeep Wrangler? Then what I might do is say, well, it's up to my financial advisor, and they basically say that I can't take out more than X dollars a year, or I run the risk of running out of money. Or you could also use, a trust, and have this through a trust department somewhere, where essentially it's not on you then to be the decision person, that you can transfer that responsibility to somebody else.
Someone else can be bad cop.
Yes,
and
exactly,
you can be good
exactly. I'd love to buy you, whatever vehicle you want,
My
but
accountant
I
won't let
just
me.
can't talk them into it.
So you say assemble a team of professional advisors. So financial planner, an attorney, a CPA, very important, someone maybe in the trust department, and insurance. What should you look for in those people? How do you, this is someone that's dealing with your money. How do you find someone that you trust?
Well, I think you've got to talk to, to 2 or 3 different advisors and kind of make sure that your personalities work well together. Obviously, you're going to talk to friends and family to see who they use, who they're comfortable with, and then you would prefer someone who obviously has experience in this type of situation, that it's not novel to them to deal with somebody that has $5 or $10 million that they're trying to exercise good care over.
Right. So find people that you trust. Sometimes just going to your bank and saying, I need a CPA. Who should I use? So.
Right. I mean, you can look at, there's a lot of regulatory information that's available about who's been in trouble, but I think you'd like to shoot a little bit higher than that. And, perhaps look at, for people that, they've had good experience with these professionals and they feel like that you would be in good hands.
So look for someone that you can trust, that you guys are on the same page, and someone that has dealt with some of this before.
Exactly, because larger amounts of wealth do create some different issues than what people deal with on a regular basis.
All right, when I think about getting a large sum of money, I also think of the tax man. Not knocking on your door.
He's happy that you feel that way.
But you do there's tax implications with all this. Is there any money that you can get that you don't have to worry about taxes? Any windfall money, or is it all subject to taxes?
No, thankfully there are situations where it does happen. Inheritance that you mentioned earlier, that's not subject to income taxes. If the inheritance was large enough, it could be subject to transfer taxes, but that's paid by the entity that's transferring the funds to you. So inheritances and gifts would be the 2 classic situations that would first come to mind. Another would be life insurance proceeds. Generally are not subject to income taxes either. So in those 3 situations, you'd be looking at funds that you wouldn't have to first work through all the tax implications that you have, versus if we had other situations, obviously the doctor that we talked about earlier, that all of a sudden is going from making a very small amount of money to making a large amount of money. As you move up the federal income tax brackets from maybe 10% to 40%, that's a noticeable difference in the amount that's left to deal with can seem rather small by the time the income taxes are removed from the equation. And so it is certainly important to work with your CPA and make sure you understand how this is going to work from an income tax perspective.
I do have a question. If you got an inheritance, say of a family home or farmland, you don't get taxed on that, but if you turn around and sell that, are you taxed on the sale of it?
Okay, the general rule would be no, because we get what's called step-up in basis, where at the we look at the value at the time the individual passed away, and that becomes the amount that we basically say that you paid for the asset. And that is important to understand because let's say that I own just make the example easy, farmland, and let's say I paid $1,000 an acre for it, and now it's worth $10,000 an acre. And my intentions are to transfer that farm to you. Well, you look at me and say, wow, you don't have much hair. I don't know how much longer you're going to be around. If you transfer it to me at your death, then you will get step up in basis. So it'll be as if you paid $10,000 for it. On the other hand, if I give it to you now, then you step into my shoes and it's as if you paid $1,000 an acre for it. And so particularly that would have implications if you planned on liquidating the farm anytime soon. So there's no difference, to you from the standpoint of you're still getting, the $800,000 of farmland income tax free from if you inherit it, but if you get it as a gift, which again, you don't have to pay any income taxes on the receipt of that, but if you turn around and sell it, then you do have a problem.
Okay. What about, I know, my mother inherited farmland, which they are renting. Do you end up paying income tax on the rental money that you're getting?
Yes, you would. And that gets to be a fairly complicated topic in terms, income taxes definitely yes, and self-employment taxes, which is what you pay when you have business income, then that can be, it depends on the structure of the lease.
So let's talk about some other things that you're going to have some tax impact on.
Okay.
You won the lottery. Maybe you won $1,000 or 10 or 100. Do you have to pay taxes on that?
Yes, and the nice thing is that they do withhold the taxes from your check, so it's not like you have to, the worst situation is, for example, with a situation where I'm changing jobs and somebody hands me $100,000, which is the balance in my 401k. Then in that situation, they are going to withhold tax, which is what we want to have happen, versus another situation, let's say somehow I find $100,000 on the sidewalk. Well, that's still taxable too, but nobody's withholding any tax from that, so it's going to be my responsibility to make those payments, and sometimes we accidentally spend some of that money before we get to that point. So yeah, so in general, most situations, the lottery situation, the retirement plan situation, the tax is going to be withheld from us. Now, it may not be the right amount of tax because they may only withhold 20%, and if it's a huge amount of money, it may end up actually being taxed at almost up to a 40% bracket, but at least some of it is there, but it may not be enough to cover everything. So again, before you get too excited and start buying 6 homes, figure out where you are from a tax standpoint.
And that's where having a tax professional is going to help you out, that you don't have to figure that out on your own.
Yeah, and you need to look at issues too, like, and one of the things as we visited about a lump sum versus an annuity, certainly we have to think about the tax implications of that, that the lump sum situation might create a pretty ugly result from an income tax standpoint versus taking an annuity where we spread it out over a period of time. And again, it depends on what the source of the lump sum wealth is. If it's a retirement account, we could roll it into another retirement account.
Okay, so we've got some other windfalls that could have some tax impact. Let's talk about sale of a business. You've had this business for X amount of years and you decide to get out and sell it, and now you've got this lump of cash.
Right. Well, unfortunately, generally that's going to be taxable. There are some strategies from fairly simple to very esoteric that we could use. One thing that we could look at would maybe be selling the thing on an installment basis, and there are some complicated rules there, but that might be something that would spread out the tax impact. Versus if you're in a large enough business, you can look at some strategies. A lot of local businesses are what's called ESOPs, which is where you transfer basically your business to a retirement plan, and that can be done in a tax-free manner, but that's a fairly complicated transaction.
All right. So
in general, it's going to be taxable.
yeah, generally a lot of this stuff is going to be taxed.
Yes,
with the
unfortunately.
exception of insurance
Right.
and inheritance.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
But even that can that can get
Down the road,
complicated
well,
down
you
the
know,
road.
presumably that you don't spend it, then it's going to obviously probably create taxable income, which is not a bad thing because
Right.
it means that you're generating income from the asset.
All right. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to
Okay.
talk about. We've all seen there's shows on TV, Lottery Changed My Life. What are some of the biggest mistakes that people can make that they're going to have this pile of money and all of a sudden 5 years later they're broke? What are they doing wrong?
Well, I think one of the things is that they are not emotionally prepared to handle it. You know, it's a situation where I've never been there before, and it'd be no difference than if you took me to Rome and set me loose on the streets of Rome. I've never been there before. I don't speak the language, and there's certainly a language involved with wealth, a lot of things that you've never heard of before. And so you've got to have the right people around you to accompany you through this transition. And you know, unfortunately, sometimes we're not surrounded by the right people that don't help us make the best decisions.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of what happens to these people. And they deal with, you know, these emotions that we've talked about, that all of a sudden I start wondering, why is it that, that you like me? And that's not easy.
So what advice do you have to help yourself prepare for sudden wealth?
I think that's really important because as baby boomers, a lot of people are preparing perhaps to transfer wealth to their children or to others. And I think it's something that you can prepare them for, that maybe you transfer a little bit of wealth to them at a time now and just let them get used to that experience, that all of a sudden, okay, here's a check for $5,000. What are you going to do with it? And there's different ways you can handle that situation. You can hand them a check for $5,000, or you can hand them $50, $100 bills, or you can say, I've opened this brokerage account for you, and I put $5,000 in it. And in that situation, it takes effort on their part to get to the money, and so probably I would start that way first and make sure that they can handle it versus just handling all these $100 bills and see what happens with that. But if we do it a little bit at a time and gradually build up their capabilities, well, I can become a good steward of these funds and do whatever it is that is not only in my best interest, but maybe my family's best interest and society's best interest with these funds.
And I think if you're the one getting the wealth, that's great advice, to transfer money onto your children. But if you yourself, I think a lot of people think, what's the first thing I would do if I got I'd quit my job. But actually, it's a lot more, probably more expensive to quit your job and not work than you think, if you think about that.
Not only that, but then all of a sudden, nothing would contribute more to your identity crisis, because all of a sudden, who are you? A lot of people associate a lot of what they do with their job, and also you completely just blew your routine. And so
Exactly.
you have all this idle time on your hands, and well, nothing makes it probably easier to spend money than having nothing to do all day long. So yeah, that would be a very dangerous step to take. And I think a lot of people that do deal with this successfully, at least initially, try to maintain their routine as much as possible until they're very comfortable with the situation and they know, okay, yeah, if I want to go travel the world, or if I want to move to Montana, I can do that at this point if that's really what I want to do.
So really, you need to develop a plan, get some professionals that you trust, that can be on the same page with you, that have some experience, that are going to help that money last your lifetime.
Yes, I think if we've learned anything, the worst thing you can do is make a lot of quick decisions when this first happens. I think you just got to call time out, step away from it. Okay, learn how to deal with this, and then once I understand how I'm going to deal with this, then you're going to make a lot of good decisions.
All right, I think we'll end it with that. David, thanks for coming back to Money in Your Pocket, giving us some great advice on sudden wealth.
Glad to be here. Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
So what should you do if you come into some unexpected wealth? Well, David has these recommendations. First, before you go on a spending spree, take a minute and assess the situation and ask if this is something that will really change your lifestyle. Next, assemble a team of professionals who can help you navigate and make the best decisions. You probably will need a financial advisor, an attorney, and a CPA. Next, you'll need to think about what impact this wealth will have on your taxes, and that's going to vary depending on the source of the money. And finally, think about a long-term financial plan that may include an education fund for your children, your own retirement funding, and other things that can help protect your wealth for the long run. That's our show for this week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for Money in Your Pocket.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.